Hello, welcome to the Introduction to AIM webinar. So glad you could join me today. I see Sepide, nice to welcome you again, and Susanna, welcome today. Hopefully this will be an interesting 45 or so minutes where I'm going to outline what AIM is all about. So let's get started right away. I thought I would just go over who I am. I'm a world language teacher or second language teacher. I developed AIM in my classroom in Toronto, Ontario, as a French teacher. And now I continue to teach. I continue to train teachers, and I am the author of AIM's programs based on the methodology, the accelerative integrated methodology. So what we're going to do is today is just go over what components of the AIM, the accelerative integrated methodology, rapidly develop proficiency. Before I do that, I would love to know a little bit more about you. If you wouldn't mind just writing in the chat box and make sure it says you have it linked to everyone. Just let me know what languages you teach, what grades you teach, where you're from, and if you'd like just to share how you heard about AIM. So you can write that in the chat box as I continue along. So how did AIM begin? Well, I started as a French immersion teacher in Toronto many years ago, and I taught kindergarten and grade 1. And at that time, the Toronto board, I taught in an inner city school. And although the kids were from varying backgrounds, I found some success teaching French immersion, where I taught math and science and social studies and language arts, just everything in French all day. Then I moved to the way I was taught French, which is core French. In Ontario, it's called core French. And it was 30 minutes a day, every day, starting in junior kindergarten. So I moved to a school whose students had French from junior kindergarten, age 4, up to, well, right through. And they had it every day. And I thought, wow, this is going to be fantastic. My grade 5s, my oldest grade, they're going to be so good in French after, every day of French since kindergarten. And after 7 years, those students that I had for that first year when I joined that school could not read or write. They couldn't understand when I spoke French. They couldn't speak. They couldn't write anything at all, not a sentence, not much less a story. So I thought, this is just silly. This is crazy. I learned French this way. And I realized that after doing my research and my thesis at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, that there really isn't a lot of proficiency in core French. And researcher I asked about this said, don't quote me, but there isn't any proficiency in core French. And I really couldn't believe it, because actually I learned to speak French that way, just, through a regular grammar-based thematic approach. And yet, so I realized, through my studies, heard that, well, only about 4% of the population actually learns that way. 96% don't fare well in a regular core French program. So I thought, wow, I don't know if I can continue teaching, and with this, no one learning anything after 7 years, this is really terrible. So I looked for ways to improve the language acquisition of my students. That was it. That was all I wanted, for the students to be able to communicate, to read, to write, and speak in French. So I see that both of you teach French, so I will be showing a lot of French examples today. But before I do, I'm going to just show you a quick video of students being taught with AIM in all different languages and all around the world.
Everyone will do the song.
Ta grand-mère, parce que c'est la grand-mère mère de chaperon rouge et la mère part un chaperon rouge. Alors c'est ta grand-mère. Fantastique. La classe toma. Yo toma.
Una persona importante o importante. Importante. Entonces, yo no hablo con tú. Okay.
我要找一个歌手，小鸡住在农场里，一些小鸡出上学，一个小国家小鸡的桌上。怎么了？哎呀，天擦了，天擦了！什么？你知道？你知道？
Okay, so as you can see, one of the things that probably stands out in a language, in an AIM classroom, is that there's a lot of gesturing and there is a lot of speaking on the part of the students. The students are doing the talking pretty much 100% of the class time, along with the teacher or independently or without the teacher, as the teacher gestures and the whole class speaks. So I see that both Susanna and Sepide, you both teach the younger students, and Sepide right up to grade 12. And Sepide, if you wish, I can also put you in touch with someone in Calgary who is a wonderful AIM teacher.
Yeah, that would be nice. Thank you.
His name is Darcy, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to welcome you to his classes, and you can see AIM in action.
Mhm.
And Susanna, I have a teacher in North Carolina that uses AIM. So I don't know how far it would be to drive to North Carolina, but
Oh, that's okay. I think I've seen it in action actually in New Orleans one year. I just
Oh,
didn't know what I
yes.
was seeing. So they seem to be very enthusiastic. And honestly, I loved where TPRS was going. And I think I've used some of your materials.
Mhm.
And then when they moved me to the lower school, it was such a learning curve.
Mhm.
Anyway, so here I am. But your story rings so true.
Yes. Oh,
Our
yes.
merci.
There are a lot of schools in Louisiana that use AIM, that's for sure, for French. And yeah, we have a fantastic, group of AIM teachers over there, and I've been there many times to
Yes.
give workshops.
That's where I grew up. Quick question, should I turn on my screen? I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, I love to see you guys. I turned them off during the videos because the thing about having the video when I'm streaming, there's too much bandwidth, and then you don't see the video of very good quality. So perhaps we can just remember to turn them off, and then we'll turn them back on again after. So the whole purpose of AIM, as I mentioned before, was to just simply develop authentic proficiency. And I love that the new guidelines in Canada and Ontario, the new Ontario guidelines, the BC guidelines, Alberta, and the actual guidelines are all based around the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference, where we talk about the can-do statements. Doesn't matter that students know lists of thematic vocabulary or know how to conjugate a verb. They simply need to know how to communicate. And so those can-do statements, they can ask a question, they can describe a picture, they can describe how they're feeling, they can say what they want. All kinds of can-do statements are so important, and that's exactly what AIM has always been wanting to do. So it is a comprehensible input-based approach. Everything we do in AIM, everything, as you'll see, every single strategy and technique helps to develop that, or helps to provide that comprehensible input. It also is a content and language integrated learning focus methodology where, as a former immersion teacher, I realized the benefit of teaching a language through another subject area. So I looked at, what I had taught, math and science and social studies and immersion. So what could I do? What could I focus on in my very short time, 30 minutes a day? So I thought, well, a literacy and arts-based approach would be really great, because Of course, literacy is so language centered. It is language. And the arts-based approach using theater, story, drama, dance, singing is of course natural to a lot of language teachers, but also it's extremely engaging and provides that pleasant repetition, especially when we're talking about music and also drama. We can do a lot of that important repetition for students that allows them to become familiar with a story in depth and intensively, so that we use that story as the basis for many of our activities, which makes then the language acquisition very comfortable, very familiar, and promotes a certain level of high level of security, actually. So what AIM does best is to go from zero proficiency or zero fluency to what I call critical fluency in a very short time. Often we find students, as I did when I moved from immersion to core French teaching in Toronto, 7 years and they still haven't learned anything. Oh my, that's just really not acceptable. It wouldn't be acceptable in math if they couldn't add after 7 years. Who accepts that? So, we want students quickly to find success. And the older the student, the less tolerant they are of spending years and years in a subject area and not learn anything. So AIM is not tied to a specific curriculum. However, I have created links to many curricula all over the world, including ACFL, including the Alberta Guidelines, Ontario, so I can share those with you. AIM is very multidisciplinary, as I mentioned. It's very supported by research on how the brain works, multiple intelligences, and I can share those with you. We have research that's been done specifically on AIM and the success there, and also brain-based research outside of AIM that supports what AIM does. It's all on our website, and I can point you to that if you're interested. So AIM is used in many schools all over the world, a lot in Canada, United States, a very good number in the Netherlands and Australia, and to a lesser degree in many other countries in the world. So a recent study, because AIM is used so widely in the Netherlands, rated the AIM classes the best in the 97th to 100th percentile. There was a large longitudinal study done in the Netherlands with students in AIM classes. And over the several years that they did this work, they showed that AIM classes outperformed AIM students in the AIM classes outperform students in other popular programs in all language skills. Students have been entered in various national French contest competitions in the United States. And in fact, a student in Ontario just won literacy. She wrote a story and won what was it called? A story writing contest in Ontario. I'll have to get the details on that, but I was just told about that yesterday. So we have some students winning some competitions and doing very well. And it's used in a variety of different states. I should include North Carolina there. We continue to expand through the United States. So the key components are the gesture approach, which is something you saw very visibly and I know Sepide, you were part of my demonstration class, which illustrated the component of the gesture approach, where the teacher is using gestures, and these gestures are based on that pared down language, the B there. And the gestures are used to convey meaning immediately. So without the need for translation, the students will know, if I do this and say ni hao, the students are going to know that means hello. If I do, if I might say buenos dias, they'll know it means hello. If I do this and say bonjour, they know it means hello. They're all just arbitrary sounds. Language is arbitrary sounds. I can say ni hao and it means nothing, if you don't speak Chinese, but if I do this with it, then you get, oh, ni hao, that's hello. And so throughout the use of the gesture approach, we're teaching the students the gestures and we're teaching them the meaning of that sound. So, viens or viene or va or ici or viens ici or va là-bas or marche or cours or saute or écoute and regarde and veut and doit and peut. So we have all these words, and as you can notice, it's very very verb-centered. AIM is very verb-centered. I teach a lot of verbs. I find that they're so necessary and really lacking in the thematic approaches, unfortunately. We do teach lots of nouns. Of course, we teach lots of nouns. We need to teach high frequency nouns. And that's where the pared down language comes in. I use gestures to teach high frequency words, lots of verbs, and also grammar. So, you know, the base adjective is content and the feminine is contente, because the feminine, the L gesture is this, elle, and this is il avec un moustache, elle and il. And then we have il est content, mais elle est contente. And the same thing for grand and grande. So the students are visualizing, kinesthetically embedding, and hearing the sound changes from masculine to feminine. We also have the verb endings. Il marche, il veut marcher, and il doit courir, and elle aime voir. So it doesn't matter whether it's ir or war or a, they all end with some form of r somewhere in there. And so it's this, and the students just practice with you that ending. And we have in past tense forms all over the shoulder: tu regardes, tu as regardé, over the shoulder. So just to let you know that grammar is embedded in the gestures. We have the syntax, as we say sentences, the students are visualizing it and kinesthetically embedding it if they're also gesturing. The gesture approach allows us to maximize language production. So the students are speaking 100% of the class time. They enter the class, the teacher gestures, the students speak. Teacher can speak along with the students if the teacher knows they don't know the words, but as soon as the students know the words, the teacher drops his or her voice right down to nothing in favor of hearing the students' voices. So the pared down language is what we are gesturing. The pared down language contains high frequency functional vocabulary, a lot of verbs, a lot of cognates, verbs, words with the widest scope of applicability. So instead of teaching rivière, lac, océan, mer, fleuve, étang, we just start with l'eau at first, because it's a word with a broad scope of applicability. And so the students are presented with an easy entry into the language. In terms of the verbs, we regularize the stem of the third person singular form that applies orally to the first and third and second person as well. So for example, I don't need to worry about conjugating vouloir, a very difficult verb to conjugate with the stem changes and the ending changes with nous and vous. So I just stick with the. And so I can use it for je veux. I can use it for tu veux, il veut, elle veut. And then instead of using nous and vous, I just do on veut, just as francophones do. They often use on instead of nous. And then tout le monde or la classe veut for vous. Eventually I teach vous, of course, I teach nous, but only once students develop a certain proficiency where they're speaking correctly with that single form. And they can do it without having to use nous and vous at first. And then, of course, we slip in the nous and vous when they're ready. I'm often teaching the young ones, and it's just too much to try to ask young ones to speak correctly and use the nous and vous form with those high frequency irregular verbs such as vouloir, pouvoir, savoir, devoir. Very high frequency, very important, but very difficult to conjugate. So we don't want to worry about conjugation right off the bat. So how do we contextualize this pared down language and thread throughout the use of the gestures in a meaningful way? Well, we do it through, as I mentioned, a literacy and arts-based approach. So we use stories, but those stories become theater pieces that are rehearsed by the students for eventual performance. And the only reason, I mean, my whole goal is not to hand students a script and just say, practice, 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 practice every day. You know, that's not the purpose of it. One good aspect of the fact that they're learning a play for performance is cooperative learning, they're working toward a common goal, very proud of their product at the end. But for me, the play is there in order for the students to have repeated exposure to a story from which then I can develop their ability for language manipulation. So these language manipulation activities are key to the development of proficiency. And I find that the best way to be able, or the easiest way to get maximum success very early in students' ability to speak spontaneously is by using this story, and we use it over 50 hours of instruction, so they come to know it very well. And it's not the only thing we do. We do lots of other things too, but we use the story as an anchor or touch point. And so that it's a very familiar environment and context for the students to come back to every day. And we do a lot of games and language manipulation activities around the context of the story, so they are very easy for them. I often, will say, if I was learning Mandarin, for example, and I don't know Mandarin except for a few words, and I was in a class and I just started to learn the language and could say a bit and could understand a bit, and the teacher said to me, "Tell me what you did on the weekend, or what you like to do in your free time." And I probably think, oh, okay, I sort of understand what he or she said, but I'm not really sure. I don't have the words really, they don't come to me, and that's what students often struggle with. I found in my classes, I want them to speak and they just didn't have the words or the context. So, but when you ask them, for example, "Qu'est-ce que le premier petit cochon aime faire dans sa maison de paille?" Well, they can answer, "Le premier petit cochon aime jouer de la guitare et il est très content dans sa maison de paille." It comes like that because they know the story, Les Trois Petits Cochons, which is a step 1 kit, so well. So our main goal is to get students quickly to transfer to spontaneous communication. And I don't mean in 1 week or in 5 weeks. I mean the first day of an AIM class. We want students starting to communicate spontaneously. The oral precedes the written. So we always start with oral and then move to written. So the gesture approach is, I find, one of the most, it is one of the key techniques to this methodology to ensuring a lot of engagement, a high level of focus, and also to get even the weak students, the strong students, and the shy students to have equal practice with the language. Usually it's just those few strong students who are doing the speaking, if anyone's speaking. Whereas in an AIM class, everyone is speaking all the time. So the weak ones get the practice they need and the repetition. The shy ones who would never speak are also speaking. They aren't ever singled out to speak on their own. So let's just look at 2 classes. The first one is not an AIM classroom. We could turn off our
Aujourd'hui, je suis
video.
très excitée parce que la semaine prochaine, je vais visiter mon ami qui habite à Winnipeg. C'est vrai, je suis née à Winnipeg et toute ma famille habite à Winnipeg. J'ai 2 sœurs et j'ai ma maman et mon papa qui habitent là. Alors, ma maman est tellement contente.
Okay, so that's a nice French classroom. The teacher is talking about herself. She's going to visit her family in Winnipeg. She's very happy. Her family's very happy and she's excited. Lovely to share things about yourself in the foreign language, really connecting with the students. So that's really great. However, we don't know if the students are understanding. There's no participation. They're sitting in silence. So this is the way the teacher would be doing the same thing in an AIM classroom.
Pardon? Excellent.
Alors, je vais
Continuez.
maintenant. Est-ce que tout le monde sait ou ne sait pas que je suis né à Winnipeg? Je sais, c'est vrai, je suis né là-bas et j'ai aussi des amis que je peux visiter.
so the teacher is using the gestures to communicate with the students, but the students are speaking on behalf of the teacher. When the students make an error in identification of a gesture, like J, she doesn't need to single anyone out. She just keeps repeating and says it loudly if that's needed. Notice that the teacher's voice is very low. She's barely whispering. It's the students' voices that we're hearing. So let's move forward here. I did mention a lot about the pared down language. If at any time you have any questions, just jump in and turn on your microphone and don't hesitate to ask. I'm here for you to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, please go right ahead. Yeah, so the pared down language is really also key in addition to that gesture approach, because what words we select in the limited time, well, personally, that I have to teach my students, it's currently 2 1-hour sessions a week. It's so limited that, or actually less than an hour, it's so limited that we need to really be sure we're teaching words that we know students will need to develop that foundation for language proficiency, the high frequency functional words. I remember years ago when I started teaching core French, and even in immersion, but there I had a lot more time. I had the whole day. I would teach, thematic vocabulary and lists of clothing or lists of activities and sports. And yes, some of them are very important that students know, but or lists of fruits and vegetables. But then I realized, the students aren't really needing those words much in class. They need a lot of verbs and a lot of questions. Où est, and je veux, and donne-moi ça, and je ne sais pas comment faire ça. Just really high frequency functional words. And I was teaching them lists of fruits and vegetables, which really wasn't very useful for their interactions. So now, I love this quote from David Booth, who was a mentor of mine and a literacy expert in English first language. He was a literacy and drama expert, but I think that his ideas really apply to a second language environment, even more than first language, where he says, children new to a language find in a story context for understanding. It's not word lists that command their attention, but the lives of characters that fill the tales they read or listen to in the literary stories they meet. And how painful it must be for those children alien to a language to sit day after day without feeling connected to what is happening in the classroom. And yet through storying, how quickly they enter the activity, making sense of what is happening, building their own versions, listening, telling, retelling, talking about, reflecting upon, and responding. So I think it's really a lovely quote that sums up really what we do in an AIM classroom. We have students go, as David Booth said, go in, out, and around a story. He said that is the best way to develop literacy skills. A lot of literacy teachers believe that doing the largest number of stories represents the best literacy approach. He said it's exactly the opposite. Doing a very minimal number of stories and having students, as he said, go in, out, and around the story, coming to know it in depth, retelling it, acting it, talking about it, reflecting on the story, critical thinking around the characters in the story and why they're doing these things. All these things develop strong literacy skills, and we're doing that through AIM in a second language environment. So let's have a look at just a small excerpt of one of the stories.
Le guépard arrive à la maison du lion. Il parle avec lui. Monsieur Lion, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Il ne pleut pas depuis longtemps. Tout le monde a très soif. C'est un gros problème. Est-ce que tu peux nous aider? D'accord, guépard. Tu dois aller à l'arbre Ungali, un arbre magique qui est loin d'ici dans la forêt. Tu dois dire le nom de l'arbre et après ça, l'arbre peut aider les animaux. Dis à l'arbre que tout le monde a soif parce qu'il n'y a pas d'eau. N'oublie pas, c'est l'arbre Ungali. Oh, merci, Monsieur Lion. Merci. Je cours à l'arbre maintenant. Au revoir.
So we have stories from different Francophone areas of the world, or involving different visits to different Francophone areas, and also fairy tales and original stories that also have a good, strong moral for students to think about and reflect on. So I also talked about the fact that we have songs. So here's one of our raps for our high school or later elementary. It's our entry rap, le rap d'entrée.
La classe commence et tout le monde est prêt. On doit parler seulement en français. Mais si quelqu'un parle en anglais, cette personne n'a pas de carte et ça c'est vrai. Ça c'est dommage, mais on espère aussi que tout le monde décide d'aider ses amis. En français, on parle tellement bien. Notre rap est terminé, oui c'est la fin.
So that we have rap d'entrée of some kind for every single entry point, and we have entry points at the kindergarten grade 1, 2 level. We have entry points at the grade 3 and 4 level. We have entry points at the grade 4, 5, 6 level. We have another kit for students who are entering at 6, 7, 8, and we have a separate kit for students who are entering at grade 9 or 10 or even 11. So all of the entry raps have the purpose of establishing upfront at the beginning of the class our commitment to use the target language only. AIM is an immersion approach where the target language is what we use. And there are so many techniques that we use that provide the comprehensible input necessary to help the students really grasp the language rapidly and commit and be able to commit to the target language only. So we have various different simpler raps and songs for the younger ones as well. And the second song here I'm going to show you is sort of for our mid-elementary students. We have songs and dances that are basically paraphrasing or retelling the story or the play that they're working on in class. So they're actually now going to move and sing to a dance that represents the story. So that's one of the songs that we have for our elementary kids. Okay. So a lot of different educators at different grades and different languages have tried AIM. This professor at the University of Southern New Hampshire came to an AIM Summer Institute one year and went back and tried AIM, our ESL kits for adults, with his immigrant students, and had a wonderful time with teaching AIM with his students. And here we have a few more.
If I had to choose, one thing that distinguishes AIM classrooms from more typical core French classrooms, it's the level of emotional investment that kids have in the process and the fun that they're having. And again, that's fuel that drives the learning process.
So they're very keen and they can apply. I guess the most remarkable point is that they can apply everything or a lot of what they've learned in a context, in everyday life context.
And what we didn't anticipate would happen was that students in grade 4 with a sibling that was in grade 7 were going home at night and actually speaking French in sentences at the dinner table. And the feedback was very impressive from the parents that all of a sudden their kids were having conversations that they couldn't follow in French at the dinner table. And we didn't realize that what we would be doing was creating a linguistic community because.
So yeah, it is lovely to see the students being able to take French out of the classroom and making it meaningful, bringing it home to their families and sharing their learning with the families. I've had some wonderful comments from parents where the kids will come home and they want to sing the songs with the parents. They want to show them the gestures. They want to teach them the words that they're learning, which is just lovely when you see language being taken outside of the classroom and the students want to make it part of who they are. So sometimes people say, well, you're just working on one story. Are they only going to be able to talk about the pigs? You know, you just, how does that work to develop authentic communication? Well, of course, as I mentioned earlier, my main goal was to make sure that students are developing authentic communication. We just do it through a literacy-based approach centered around a story to develop that authentic proficiency. And yes, of course, they can use the words from the story and outside of the story. We don't just use words from the story because we're doing a lot of gesturing that, as you saw that teacher talking about going to Winnipeg, where it has nothing to do with the story. We filmed a few students in grade 8 who had completed a couple of kits.
est très fantastique. Oui. Tu es toute seule maintenant. Et tout le monde a avec Melissa. Oui. J'ai oublié son nom. J'aime qui écoute mes chansons. Est-ce que tu peux chanter ça maintenant? Ça va bien. Oh, oui. Est-ce que tu peux chanter maintenant? Non, parce que tu es très oh oui.
Il y a 5 personnes dans ma famille, mais je pense que mon frère est un animal.
So nice to see that they just can talk about anything. What we saw at the first scene was the young guy trying to get the person opposite him to see if she wanted to sing one of the songs they'd learned, and she didn't want to do that. And so he was saying, well, it's because you're very, and I think he wanted to say embarrassed, but embarrassé isn't one of the earlier pared down language words, but it was nice to see that the girl beside him thought of a word that would work, which was from Les Trois Petits Cochons, which was peur. And so from the song Qui a peur du méchant loup. And so she could give that to him. And it sort of illustrates how we're here. And I really encourage students to help each other. We're all here to learn. We're all here to help. So that was kind of nice to see. So I've talked a lot about the development of oral proficiency, but AIM equally develops written language proficiency because it is a literacy-based approach. As I mentioned earlier, oral comes first. If we can develop, I've found, if we can develop oral language skills very, very well, the transfer to written is immediate when we're talking about students who are Anglophones as a first language, because we share the same alphabet and we're going from English to French or English to Spanish. Really, this is the same alphabet. Sure, there are a few sounds that are different, but they're going to be using the same words that they're familiar with from the story usually when they're doing their writing, because they're going to be answering questions and doing all kinds of activities around the story. So they're seeing over and over and over again and becoming familiar with those same sounds like and that may be different from English, but all the other sounds are pretty much the same. So let's have a look at some students writing together in French.
Oui.
Il faut te mettre en salle et déchirer.
Est-ce que ça, c'est la même histoire, mais dans les mots différents? Dans les mots différents?
Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? On peut faire
Tu fais un partenaire? Beaucoup. Est-ce que tu fais
Est-ce
que tu fais ça?
Est-ce que c'est son?
Non, ça c'est juste.
Tu fais ça?
Louis commence à marcher dans la forêt. Il espère trouver une amie dans la forêt.
Il va dans une détresse.
En train de... Oh, excellent. En train de... En 3 mots. En train de...
So yeah, when we're working on, so about 2/3 of the day is at the beginning of AIM is the teacher in front of the class, working with the gestures, using the gestures, having the students speak along with her or him. The other third of the day, the students are working with a partner and they're working through the written activities, talking and interacting as they are writing, each writing separately, but they interact as they're writing. In an AIM classroom, there is never silence. We don't have students there for 10 minutes out of 30 minutes just writing in silence. They're to be talking and discussing with each other, coming up with the answer, and then writing their answers on their own. We do a lot of creative work with the language as well. So as everything is, AIM is a very model-based approach. So before we ask students to do anything, we model for them. So you saw that entry routine that we have as a model. Next, the teacher will model how to write the class with the class, a class entry routine. And then subsequently, the students will write their own entry routine.
Aujourd'hui, la classe commence et tout le monde danse et danse. Quand j'entre dans la classe française, je ne parle pas en anglais, je parle en français, fantastique. La Bengalie a Vietnam. Je parle en français, c'est très bien. Je fais les actions avec mes mains. En anglais, ça c'est vrai. Mot, word.
It's nice to see grade 8 boys from an inner city school really taking pride in what they've done in French, and they created that rap and they did it to their own beat and they performed it and were filmed. So that's just lovely to see. So let's have a look at some of the written work. If you have any questions, please just jump right in.
Sorry, I was wondering with little kids, like let's say kindergarten, or we have like even pre-kindergarten. So I was age 4.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I don't know how I can even model with being interrupted like 10 times per minute. So I like, they don't even understand English well, instructions in English, and some of them can't even sit still for like 10 seconds. Then I have to constantly like ask them to pay attention, or let's do it together, or, you know, it's difficult with little ones.
It is, yes. I found little ones very difficult before AIM because they don't have a clue what I'm saying. Once you start gesturing and doing something that's familiar and repeating the story over and over and over again, little ones don't care about the repetition. They actually love it. So you do the same song when you come in, you do the gesturing of something familiar with the kids, and they all are watching the gesture movements, and they can gesture along if you like or not, but they're all focused on your gestures. It is unbelievable how the use of gestures, it's almost like a telescope or camera coming into focus. Suddenly they understand, and there's something to look at and to follow, and everyone else is saying those words. So those who are very distracted, they're also, oh, wow, what are they all saying? Oh, I'm going to say that too. You know, they're joining in to say the words. So it's, and you're doing this, some of the same songs over and over again, and you're telling that same little story, La Poule Ma Boule, over and over again, which is very simple and very, you know, repetitive. And so even on the first time you show that story with the puppets, and they're excited, they see the puppets, and you say that story, even the first way through, le ciel tombe, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? And then, you know, the characters say it over and over again. It's quite unbelievable and significant how the transformation when for the very young students, but the same applies for older students. I mean, they usually sit still a little better, but you know, even the older students, you know, they become very distracted. You know, grade 1s and 2s and 3s and up can be very distracted in a classroom where they don't understand a word you're saying and you're trying to speak in target language only. Whereas as soon as you bring those gestures in, as soon as you bring a story that becomes familiar, well, it's quite unbelievable how the transformation can happen. Of course, there are always things that happen there that great, but what you do with the gestures when someone is being silly or perhaps, you know, touch someone else, you say, oh no, Susanna, and the whole class is talking. Susanna, ça, ne fa pas, ne fa pas. so the whole class is speaking to Susanna, who is doing something you don't want to do, and the whole class is helping you out. And the whole class is also realizing your expectations and articulating your expectations. So it's quite interesting what happens in an AIM classroom, but not only for the sort of negative things, also for the very positive things. AIM is a very positive approach. So there's so many words for praise. We have fantastique, excellent, très, très bien, bravo. So we use those words that we teach within the first week of implementation of AIM to help students praise themselves constantly and praise each other. Susanna, fantastique, tu parles en français. Fantastique, très, très bien. The whole class is saying it and praising Susanna. So it's very different.
I use I use gestures with songs, but a huge takeaway for me on this is the verbs, because you're exactly right. If you don't gesture verbs and you're just, who can make a sentence out of carrot, onion, tomato?
Exactly.
But I completely agree with you. And I started teaching kindergartners 3 years ago, and it was a huge adjustment for me, even going down from first grade to kindergarten. Like
Yes.
just 1 year was huge.
Oh,
And
yes.
if you put a story to it, and if you get that visual going, I feel like I'm starting, but I'm not there yet. But I can get them, because in the afternoon they're very restless. And I had a group today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's hard. But we were doing a little skit, and I also have learned what you said is true. If you really have to practice in the beginning, before writing, but also before asking them to speak spontaneously. Otherwise, they don't really know the correct pronunciation. Does that make sense?
Well,
but anyway, we're doing a skit today, and the other ones were just enthralled. So I like the verb part and the way you were talking about treating any interaction, because I do struggle with staying in the target language, and I do translate when I'm saying my gestures. Do you all do that also?
Yeah, and there's no translation typically, unless we do a very quick, what we call sandwiching, if the gesture isn't obvious. So I might do maintenant, now, maintenant. So after I do that one quick thing, and then I contextualize maintenant in many, many different contexts, the kids come to understand it. And of course, I know they know it once they're using it in their own expression. The one reason why AIM works so rapidly to get students up and running in their using their own language is because they're talking all the time with you. They're seeing the gestures and understanding, hopefully, what those gestures mean. And so they're talking all the time while you're in front of the class. So they're getting extensive practice with their own language production, even pre-verbal, even before they can actually speak on their own. They will have said thousands of sentences, or hundreds at least. And so it's very natural flow to their own language production once they get into their partner group activities. And they start with baby talk. Oh, regarde, crayon, coloris avec le crayon. Prends le crayon, je veux rose. Oh, coloris avec rose. They'll start, because the first activity is coloring the puppets for example, the step 1 kit, Les Trois Petits Cochons. So they need the colored pencil pink. And so, they'll start to speak independently within the first few days around a topic that you have already gestured about a lot. And so they've already said a lot with your gesturing. So it becomes a very natural segue to their spontaneous language. And then from that, we flow into working with the story, questioning, extensive questioning, total questions, partial questions, other activities that scaffold up through to their ability to for example, do something like my grade 1 student here. It was her first year of French, 30 minutes a day. And she wrote this story retelling of the story that we've been working on. They're not allowed to use any sentence directly from the original story. They have to retell it completely in their own words. And this develops an ability for circumlocution, which is very important in a second language environment, a foreign language environment, when you have a lot of vocabulary in your own language and not much in the target language. You have to figure out how to use the words you have in the target language to say what you need to say.
Wow.
So this activity story retelling, and so, you know, for a grade 1 student, that's very good. First year of French, 30 minutes a day. Not all students can do that because not all students can write very well, even in their own language. But if they're starting to be emergent writers, then I expect them to do a few pages by the end of the first kit. So then we jump up to Spanish, for example, grade 11. Well, it's going to look very different from grade 1. It's a much longer, but it's still, you know, after about 90 hours of instruction, toward the end of the first year or so, or even midway through the year, if it's the first kit, and they're writing their retelling, and it's much more accurate, much more detailed, much longer in, of course, grade 11. And even in Japanese, we're having students write, albeit minimally, but with the characters, Japanese characters, it's quite amazing. And then L'Arbre en Galie, grade 7, a story used in grade 7, first year of French, again, 40 minutes a day. And again, much longer than the grade 1 because they're already writing well in their first language by grade 7 usually. So it's much longer, but again, it's the first year of French, and they're writing their retelling. After they do a retelling in the second kit, and then the third step and fourth step and fifth step, then not only do they do a retelling, but they also do a story extension. And that is, well, in French, we call it Qu'est-ce qui se passe après? And these are my grade 1 students who did Les Trois Petits Cochons. And just have a look at this and tell me what you think about this grade 1. One of the students was brand new to French that year, and the other student had had French with me in kindergarten. Après que le loup sort de Les Trois Petits Cochons, il va à la maison et dort et se réveille et marche à Loblaws. It's a grocery store. Et court et marche. Monsieur Loup est très fou et content. Et le loup frappe à la porte de la fille amie. Il dit à son ami, est-ce que tu veux danser avec moi? Oui, je veux. Je aime toi. L'ami dit, est-ce que tu veux aller à ma maison? Le loup dit, oui, oui, je veux. Le cochon est ici, dit le loup. J'ai peur, dit la fille amie. Cours. Oops, Daisy, what did she say there? I've lost it. Ooh, sorry about that. Cours à sa maison. Oui, je veux aller à ma maison. Est-ce que tu veux aller à ma maison? Oui, je veux aller à ta maison, dit le loup. Je veux faire une fête. Grade 1 just love les fêtes. Dit la fille amie. Le loup dit oui, 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 je veux. Est-ce que tu veux manger avec moi? Dit le loup. Oui, 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 dit la fille amie. Je veux, je veux, je veux. And it goes on and talks about going to Loblaws, the grocery store, to buy some food. You can see the pleasant repetition that is inherent in AIM. Oh my goodness, do we repeat things? And it's through that repetition that the students actually build that strong foundation. If there's not enough repetition, the students can't build any foundation for language proficiency. So inherent as part of our comprehensible input is what we call pleasant repetition. I love the writing here of Sase Delicieux. So what can you tell me about what you see in this story by these grade 1 students?
Sometimes hard to read.
Yes. So what does that tell you? Could they be writing that if they couldn't say it?
Right. They're sounding it out. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Grade 1 student. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say one of the things I struggle with if I introduce writing too quickly with my 3rd or 4th graders without having them familiar enough is that they'll say Lee Loop instead of Le Loup. So it looks like someone who's writing very naturally, sounding it out. But also they've seen the words, right?
They have. Most of them, you know, some of the words, of course, are from the story because they knew the story. This is an extension. The story finishes where the wolf falls in the soup, of course. So what happens after? So yes, they know peur from the song. The loup comes up in the story all the time. Cochon comes up in the story all the time. Some of the D comes up in the story all the time, but not all of them. Ve comes up in the story all the time, but some of the words don't, and so they had to guess at them, like mange here, mange. That's not in the story itself. Délicieux isn't in the story itself. And fille is not in the story itself, nor is ami. But so they're guessing at the words, but you can tell that they're using the English sounds here, which is fine. I mean, if they can write this well in grade 1, 30 minutes a day, I'm thrilled, because there is no doubt that, you know, if they're writing extensively like this, the refinements will come as they get better in English, in their reading and their writing. They become better in French. They're more exposed to those same words, and they will get better and better. Now, the reason they're writing well like this is because they have done a series of scaffolded language manipulation activities that we have in AIM that ensure they have practice in a very, very systematic way with the high frequency words that are in this story. So through various questions and other activities, the students have had practice of the words before they end up writing these stories. So they do a lot of other activities. They do little book reports and retellings on stories outside of the story. That a student in Missouri in grade 8 did a Qu'est-ce qui se passe avant? So basically a story that tells what happened before one of the stories from our high school kits. And she wrote a 1,000-word story in her second year of AIM. I don't think I'll get into this. I think I'm going to actually jump because I don't know where we are. We're almost done, out of time. Actually, we passed our time we usually use. So if you're
gonna have to leave soon.
Yes, I know.
My last question before I go.
Of course.
You know, Le Petit Robert started including EL for the gender neutral pronoun, and I have a student in grade 7 and another one in grade 9, 2 boys who who don't want to be identified as ill. Like, I was just wondering if we want to use them in AIM, like, is there any gesture associated with that?
I hadn't developed a separate one, but I have worked with some teachers and they just do EL like this. EL, just combined, EL.
Okay.
So it basically covers both.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. But certainly CPD, I know you've talked to Paul a bit, and you know, I think you've heard about our summer institute and the kits and things. So, but if you have any questions, he'll be happy to help.
So much. Yeah. So I'm in my spring break, but once I come back to school, I follow up with my principal. Yeah.
Perfect. That's great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Bye. So Susanna, I mentioned that we do have kits. So we have a full complement of resources, including in your kit, a hard copy box. You get the program guide, the teacher's guide with a fully explained activity by activity, when to introduce and how to teach each and every word in the pared down language and how to contextualize it and what is the gesture for it, and all laid out with various templates for your lesson plans, how to introduce and when to introduce all the activities for the partner group activities that students work on with a partner as they're doing their writing activities. And that's all described in the teacher's guide, and then the actual activities appear in the partner group activities book that you can photocopy. We have big books, hard copy big books for the little kids, the projectable e-readers for all students as well, that come in our portal. We have posters and image cards for all the songs and the raps, activities, assessment activities books as well, DELF tests that are basically a series of tests that test overall proficiency and aren't related to the kits, but there are assessment activities based on the kits in each and every kit. For students in the elementary and junior high and senior high grades, not for primary. We don't have tests for them, but we have a lot of activities for assessment. And then we have our student portal, which allows you to have access to all of the audio, video materials, all of the gestures from the kit laid out by section in the order they appear in the teacher's guide. You would teach them the videos of the songs, the raps, the dances, the play gestured. All of the posters are projected for all the songs and raps, and then an e-reader of that story for that kit that's read aloud with highlighted text. And then a series of instructional videos with examples of how to implement AIM in the classroom as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the correlations with ministry guidelines across Canada and the actual guidelines. Our next training is our virtual summer institute. Really, AIM teachers who are learning about AIM, we really encourage you to join our institutes and meet the other facilitators and the other AIM community of teachers that are either learning or experienced with AIM. And for teachers beginning with AIM, we have our beginner French course on the 18th and 20th of July, and also August 22nd to 26th. And it's a 2-day, very engaging, very lively, interactive, full-on practice on Zoom with the gestures and learning exactly how to implement every aspect of the methodology, all the activities and all the techniques and strategies. So
I think I'm going to put this in my professional development for the training this summer. I'm very, very intrigued, and I love what you have shared with us tonight. And so I think already it's been useful, and you're very inspiring. And I will say, I think, you know, I have a similar, like, I don't want the students to sit and be bored. And so
no.
we do a lot of singing already. I just think that I have the fundamentals there,
Mm-hmm.
but not what it takes to send their, it's still a little bit stalling, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I appreciate your time.
Oh, well, I hope that we can help you and enrich and just take what you've got as sort of your seed of inspiration and build on that. That would be just.
I do have one quick question. I've spent the last few years, especially during the COVID time, building and making a lot of activities.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be moving away from some materials that I've created, although maybe easily I could be scaffolding or changing some of my activities. But do you offer like 1 unit at a time, or is it best to just buy?
It's 1 unit. Yeah, you just start simply.
Okay.
Yeah, you just start, depending on your grades, there's just 1 unit for any grade level entry. And you can sometimes use, you know, 1 unit, or we call them kits, one kit for a broad range of grades, you know, use the same kit for all those grades. So for your own training, we do recommend that you try to keep it very simple for yourself and get that repetition for yourself as well. And yes, AIM is a methodology. If you have a fun game or activity, you just do it a la AIM. That's all, using the pared down language and the gestures.
Right. Oh, great. Merci beaucoup.
Oh, ça me fait plaisir. Merci beaucoup, Susanna. Hope to see you in July or August.
I will be there. Merci.
Thank you. Merci.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.